Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this really important discussion about post-extractivism and what life might look like after an extractive economy. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm the convener and co-founder of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and I'm also a co-founder and director of the New Economy Network Australia. And today's webinar is part of both the Earth Laws Month, which is more than 30, I think we reached 35 events, all online across the month of September, to celebrate humanity's relationship with the living world across many sectors, including Indigenous knowledge, law, economics, ethics, the arts, and much more. And within that, Nina and Ayla have partnered up to create Economics for the Earth. This week of webinars, we kicked off on Monday with a really important discussion about population and consumption. And on Tuesday, we had one of our leading radical economic thinkers, Richard Dennis, talking about what would it take to build an Earth-centered economy. On Wednesday, we had a discussion about degrowth. And Thursday, we had some terrific speakers looking at this growing movement towards well-being economics. And I was asking lots of questions about whether well-being economics would in fact be protecting our environment and caring for country in any way different to the old economy. So we had some very interesting discussions. And that brings us here today to focus on one of the biggest problems we all face as a people and a species and an Earth citizen, which is the over-extraction of stuff from our planet, whether it's minerals, oil, forests, fish, particularly since the 1950s with the great acceleration, that perfect storm of technology, cultural attitudes to taking, we have seen our planet stripped of so much of its beauty and life. So in today's session, we're going to talk about those issues. But before I introduce our guest speakers, I'd like to acknowledge country. For those joining us from other places, it is a very late but important tradition now for non-Indigenous particularly, but all people, to acknowledge whose country they actually live on. Australia is a colonial nation invaded by the British Empire in 1788. So I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal First Nations Indigenous peoples. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging leaders and elders joining us in working really hard in their communities right now. I'd also like to acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonisation. As a non-Indigenous person, my ancestors were brought to this country unwillingly, the Irish convicts, dragged across by the British Empire. Secretly, I'm thrilled that they were brought here because I love this continent, but I also take very seriously my responsibilities to be part of a different future. And that is my introduction to our session today. But now what I'd love to do is introduce you to our speakers. I'd like to acknowledge that Nat Lowry is here with us today, a very dear friend, colleague. She's very unwell, so she's just going to be listening and supporting her other colleagues. Nat was going to be speaking, but I'm really pleased she's still here with us. And I mean with us in the webinar, not still here with us generically, she's not that sick. I'd like to introduce Liz Downs, and she's going to be talking 101 post-extractivism, and Liz will talk for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to hear from Carlos Zorillo from, the title of his talk is The Global South, an Ecuadorian case study on extractivism and the pathways towards post-extractivism, including Buen Vivir, I hope I'm saying that right, my terrible Aussie accent, and Marta Conda from talking about the global north and Australia, degrowth and the need for wider solidarity and intersectional movement to support local struggles. Their bios are on the Humanitix booking page if you want to read more or look them up. But for now, I'd really like to welcome Liz Downs to share with us Post-Extractivism 101. I can't wait.
Thanks, Michelle. I'd just also like to quickly acknowledge that I'm speaking from Nipaluna, otherwise known as Hobart, in Lutruwita, which is otherwise known as Tasmania. And I also pay my respects to living custodians of this land. So I'm just going to share some slides. So hopefully this will go, I'm going to share screen and hopefully this will go smoothly. So yeah, so I've just been asked to do a very basic 101. So those who already know what post-extractivism is, just bear with me. because I'll also just want to lead into Carlos and Marta and what they'll be talking about. Okay, so yeah, brief is could life look like beyond an extractive economy? And I don't know, like being an activist, I kind of find it hard to think of what life could look like beyond an extractive economy. So I think this presentation is going to be more like an idea of how we might possibly get towards a post-extractive economy. Do you want to move on? Great. So my 101 is just introducing where the concepts have come from. And to describe post-extractivism, it's good to first do a brief on what extractivism is. And this is actually rooted in Latin American schools of thought, and not just the left-wing socialist movements, which have been very strong, but particularly the indigenous movements, which of the Andean countries of Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Uruguay as well has been strong. And so a definition of extractivism here from our colleagues at War on Want. They've produced some good stuff on the burgeoning mining issues around the world. The high intensity, export-oriented extraction of common ecological goods rooted in colonialism and the notion that humans are separate from and superior to the rest of the living world. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Yeah, and it's really important to recognize that extractivism comes in a lot of different forms. It's not just mining or oil, but though it includes those two things. So here's a fossil fuel extraction, obviously a major problem. An increasingly major problem now is what's been known as green extractivism, which is literally burgeoning extractivism that is towards net zero. So wind farms obviously take an awful lot of minerals. And you need copper to fire the wind farms, the wind turbines up, and you need lots of rare earth metals and things like that. So there are different forms of extractivism. All of them are concerning in their scope and magnitude. Okay. Important thing to note about extractivism is that it's predatory. And this has been defined as such by a Latin American academic, Eduardo Godinez, who's Uruguayan, who's written a lot of the seminal stuff on extractivism and defining terms. It's basically driven by an imperative of economic growth, large-scale intensive industrial production, and the externalization of social and environmental costs of that production. And the externalization, next slide. It's also really important to note that it is a colonial practice. It actually is the same thing as colonialism. If you define colonialism as the practice of extending and maintaining a nation's political and economic control over another people or area, guess what extractivism does? Except you can replace nation with corporate body, asset manager, state corporate capture, all those types of things. Okay, next slide. And the big thing that extractivism does is it creates what is known as sacrifice zones, which have been described by Naomi Klein, no less, as those places that, can't see my writing, to the extractors somehow don't count and therefore can be poisoned, drained, or otherwise destroyed for the supposed greater good of economic progress. And the picture there is actually one of Carlos's. He'll talk more about this area when he comes on, but it was a beautiful, pristine, intact rainforest. It's been threatened with mining for about nearly 4 decades or 3 decades. And yeah, that's what just exploratory drilling has done to the water, causing lots of threats to endangered species. So that was what we would call an example of a sacrifice zone. Next slide. Anyway, so moving on to post-extractivism, what's this? Eduardo Godinez again, he's a major academic in this area. He speaks about the post-extractivist imperative for moving forward into a livable planet and a livable society. So given that major extractive industries have acute social and environmental impacts, given that there's such a high propensity for conflict and violence, which surrounds many, you could say nearly all extractive enterprises, and given that extractivism actually offers very limited economic benefits to the people on the ground who are impacted because costs are externalized, and given that moving into new areas of resource exploitation, such as green mining, for example, for lithium and copper and cobalt, implies risky procedures with a high social and environmental impact. This is why it's necessary and urgent to take forward a post-extractivist alternative. We need to consider the different options available for breaking the dependency on the extractive industries. Next slide. So moving on to people who have been spending many years trying to work out what in a post-extractivist society could look like and what needs to be done. So Alberto Acosta is another really well-known post-extractivist scholar. He is actually an economist, and he used to be the Minister of Energy and Mines of Ecuador. So it says a lot about Ecuador. He was really instrumental in creating the new Ecuadorian constitution that recognizes the rights of nature. So he says that to begin any post-extractivist and post-growth option, it's important to focus on building societies that are anchored in equality and equities that allow us to create an ecological and social balance. Okay, next slide. Just keeping an eye on the time as well. Moving on to a really strong vision for post-extractivism that's also come out of Latin America, the Buen Vivir. And this is essentially, really importantly, a decolonial stance on development. It's come right out of the indigenous cosmovisions of the Andean nations. So Buen Vivir translates in English very loosely as living well, or good living, or living in harmony with nature and with society. In Quechua or Quechua languages, it's Sumak Kauzai, and in Aymara, it's Sumak Kaman. Both a discourse and a living aspect of post-extractive social and political movements in numerous Latin American countries. So moving on. Just a quick, Carlos will go more into Buen Vivir as it is spoken to in Ecuador, but basically it seeks to ensure people's quality of life. In a broad sense, it goes beyond material well-being to include spiritual well-being, and the individual to include a sense of community, as well as beyond anthropocentrism to include nature. So under Buen Vivir, the values inherent in nature are recognized, and therefore also the duty to maintain its integrity at both the local and the global level. This perspective aims to transcend the dualism that separates society from nature, as well as breaking with the linear idea of history that assumes our countries must imitate the lifestyles and culture of the industrialized nations. Nice picture of the Amazon in the background. Moving on. Just a really brief coverage of the rights of nature, because even though it will have been covered in other seminars in this series that Michelle's holding. So basically the rights of nature have come out of Buen Vivir, very intrinsic part, a biocentric position enshrined in Ecuador's 2008 constitution, the first country in the world to do so. Chile has just tried, unfortunately hasn't quite succeeded yet, but maybe they'll get there eventually in the next round. And successive governments in Ecuador have been hell-bent on expanding grand-scale extractive industries, as Carlos will speak to. But the constitution actually does still have some weight with regard to enforcing rights of nature. As by a really cool example of December last year, when the Constitutional Court of Ecuador actually ruled to uphold the rights of nature of endangered species living in a really amazing cloud forest called Los Cedros, which was threatened by mining from 2 mining companies, and those mining companies had to basically get out. So that was a major win. We're not sure how we can replicate this win, but it's a really good precedent. So I might start winding up fairly shortly. Yeah, next slide. I think I've only got a couple more. So just a really brief run through of the ideas of the debates around post-extractivism are really largely about how to get there. And the global north, which is the industrialized countries, including Australia, have had different ideas about how to reduce the impact of extractive industries. And it's basically the dichotomy here is based in the extractive dichotomy, with the fact that the global north, which is our electric cars, on the right, on the left here, of course, the raw materials that are mined for our lifestyles are have generally been in the global south, in the less industrialized or the less so-called developed countries. Increasingly also and also very importantly in so-called less developed parts in global north countries, as in Australia, where it's perfectly fine to kind of mine the shit out of Aboriginal lands, so that people living in the cities can have lifestyles. Next slide, I think it's the second last. Yeah, and so this dichotomy is repeated when we're looking at how to get to post-extractivism. So on the left, we've got somebody in the global north with a nice little box of organic vegetables. So, it's all very well. We can go and live organic, and we can, try and consume less and consume and reduce consumption and consume more ethically. And that's all really good. But then in the global south, you've got these massive movements. This is actually from Ecuador again, another picture provided by Carlos. And this is, a global march that happened, a national march that happened in 2018 for water and life, when the mining expansion was really starting to take off and impact on there are many thousands of people, Indigenous and rural people. So they're, while the global north is looking at living more ethically, the global south is fighting extractivism. And next one. And then I just want to really make a note, and Marta, I think, will speak more to this, but what's really important with Pathways to Post-Extractivism is that it's done in justice and solidarity. So on the left here, we've got Vicky Abdullah from the Chihuahua Nation at the IMARC, the International Mining and Resources Conference in 2019 in Melbourne, surrounded by police. Those of you who are at the IMARC protests would know that ended fairly violently, in fact, with violence coming from the police side. So so we've got we really do need to be standing in justice, in solidarity with people who are bearing the brunt of extractivism. And on the left here again, we've got the Stop Lynas campaign, which is a mega mining company mining rare earths that's dumping a whole ton of radioactive waste in Malaysia as we speak. So I think the last one, Nat, and then we can move on to Carlos. That's your cue, Carlos. Supporting alternative visions. I was running out of photos and time and headspace. So, here again from my Ecuador photo stash, was just supporting, local economies, particularly food producing. And it's really important that, people are able to have food sovereignty and water sovereignty, and not to have to be fighting, foreign multinational companies. And the picture on the right is me holding a giant zucchini, which also proves my point. Okay, and that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for persevering with technical issues. I'm so glad that Nat could be the background source of your slides. So thank you, Liz. That was really interesting. And I just put a little plug in there. I'm looking forward to your and Nat's discussion about green extractivism on the 23rd of September as part of an extended part of Economics for the Earth. So thank you very much. And Carlos is speaking next. Is that the right flow? Yep. Okay. So it's my great pleasure to put the spotlight on Carlos, joining us from Ecuador. We're very honored to have you, Carlos, and we look forward to your presentation. And I think either Nat or Liz may share a photo or two, but otherwise, over to you, Carlos. Thank you.
I was wanting to start showing the photograph of where I live.
Yep.
Can you guys post it up there?
Hang on, I was.
Liz, can you do it, or can Nat do it perhaps?
Do you want to just send it to me by email?
I can try also. Anyway, I live here. What you're going to see is right in front of my house. If I can find a way to make this work. It is cloud forest, and most people don't realize what cloud forests are, but they are a tropical forest that happens to be in the mountains. It's also called montane tropical forest because we are in the mountains. We are much more biologically diverse than most areas in the world. It's also, there are a lot more endemic species here. And this is the land of the Imbaya and the Caras indigenous that were here before the Incas. So this is where I live and play and where I am. You know? It is a magical land. If you ever get a chance to see a real cloud forest, it'll blow you away. It is stunningly beautiful, and it is wildly biodiverse. This is where I've been living here since 1978. And there's just no way to describe the energy of this forest and the grief that I feel when I know that it may be destroyed to just benefit of transnational mining companies and the wealthy 15% of the world's population, which is where most of the minerals and energy is being consumed by the 15% of the world's richest countries, population, I mean. Where I live, where you're looking at, is actually part of a BHP mining concession, Broken Hill Properties, which is based in Australia and the UK. Most of the Intag area, and Intag takes its name from a river, and there's still a lot of cloud forest left, fortunately. Most of this area has been concessioned away without any sort of consultation, not even with local governments. It's just very vertical. People in Quito give out concessions to whoever they want without taking into consideration the real potential for the land. And we're pretty close to a tourist area called Otavalo. And so this has enormous tourism potential, but is this perspective of getting as much money out quickly, and the blindness of the officials to see anything but copper in this land that you're looking at. Or if you happen to be a logger, all you see is the potential of turning this forest into sellable lumber. Is this perverse vision of development and what value and wealth is that is threatening all these lands, not only here in Intag, but up and down the Andes in Ecuador. And the Andes, by the way, above 1,000 meters is considered to be the tropical Andes biological hotspot. I don't know if you know these, there's 36 of these biodiversity hotspots in the world. And the tropical Andes is the most biodiverse by a long shot of all the rest of them. So this is where copper mining development is proposed in areas just like this, not too far away from where I live, in the Toisan Range. The Japanese discovered copper in the 90s. And that's when DECOIN, the organization I helped found, we were founded to confront this mining threat in 1995. Since then, we've been fighting 27 and a half years, at least one lifetime. And it's very, you might guess, it's very difficult to fight. We're not really fighting a mining company. We're just fighting, you could say, the growth of this perverse mentality I was telling you about, which is this crazy way of looking at the world. I mean, if we look at a land like this and the government and mining companies and a lot of the world's population, unfortunately, will look at it and say, well, it looks very nice, but there's copper under there and it's worth more than anything else. So there is a tragic lack of putting a value on nature, and not just economic value. There's also social value, environmental value. We live in ecosystems, every one of us, whether we realize it or not, and we live in communities. This is a biological community as well as a social community. And this has value to the people who live here, beyond what the economic value can be put on it. That's the value of having a safe society, healthy ecosystem where you can go swimming and not worried about getting sick. I drink water out of the tap. That's wealth. The soil, the wealth in the soil, these are all things that are never taken into account when the extractivist mindset rolls into town. So it creates these conflicts all over the world. And there's this clash of vision besides indigenous and non-indigenous population. And where I live, most people are not indigenous, they're mestizo. It is this clash of vision of people who live on the land and have a connection to the land, and people who live out of the area and who don't know how to value anything but economic wealth, which is what has brought us to where we are today. So we have been fighting mining development since 1995. The communities, we kicked out the Japanese in the late 90s. The Canadians came, a junior mining company from Canada came, very aggressive. These companies don't have a reputation to lose, so they don't mind using violence and threats and so on. And they use just about everything in the book to access their mining concession and continue the work of the Japanese. They were unable to do that, even though they used paramilitaries, they paid lawyers and judges to try and put some people in jail, including myself. I had 19 police break into my house 6 o'clock in the morning a while back. They did everything they can, I mean, death threats, but they were unable to continue where the Japanese led off. And that speaks a lot to the value and the commitment and the strength of local population. We are confronting transnational mining companies and the governments that are supporting these companies. Not only that, but also there's unforeseen actors that most people don't realize. When people see mining conflicts or petroleum conflicts, they only see the communities and the mining companies. Well, that is just two players in this whole universe. There's the banks that are funding these companies. the stock exchanges where these companies are getting money to come down here and violate our rights and try and despoil lands like this. There is, of course, the government. There's the free trade agreements that basically clear the way for all these mining companies and petroleum companies to come to countries like Ecuador by removing labor laws, obstructions, and environmental regulation, and reducing taxes. So it attracts all these unsavory actors. All these actors and factors play into these conflicts. But the root of it is this difference of vision of what you talked about well-being, Liz. Exactly. What is well-being? I have students come and visit here every once in a while. That is one of the questions I sit down with them and say, what is well-being to you? It's really important to figure out what well-being is to all of us. Because to people who live off the land, in small communities, tightly knit communities, well-being is very different than a lot of these city people that are making decisions about allowing extractivism in lands like this. So well-being is essential. And I think it would be nice for us to stop using the term development and more start using well-being. Because development implies money and materialism. I think well-being implies a lot more. You know, social contacts, a safe environment, safe, also healthy environment, and so forth. Money only plays, it's just one aspect of well-being is. So it'd be nice if we were to stop using the word development and focus more on what well-being is. In that sense, the Ecuadorian Constitution is pointing the right way. They say well-being is a constitutional right for Ecuadorians. And the question is how to interpret well-being. The government says, well, we can't have well-being without tons and tons of money. And to get that money, we need to destroy these primary forests and destroy the habitat of endangered species. Like we have, there's 59, so far 59 endangered species of animals and plants just within the mining area, which is only 5,000 hectares. This will be devastated because the government doesn't know how to value everything else but the copper. So this is what we've been fighting. And it is this mindset when you come right down to it, this extractivist mindset. And it's very much linked with corruption. I'm sure in Australia too. I mean, you guys have a nightmare of a scenario with extractive companies. And the laws are, they always accommodate these companies. They always change the laws to accommodate these companies just because of the economic power that they yield. One of the aspects I would like to focus on is that to get to this post-extractivist future, it's going to be really tough. We have to be sincere about it. It's going to be very difficult to get there. We need to, before we get there, we need to establish no-go zones. Areas where there should be no extractivism. In the meanwhile, while we create this post-extractivist future. I think it's very important to think about what these areas need to be. To me, there cannot be any extractivism where local communities, after being fully informed of the impacts, decide they don't want it. Who has more right to decide over the land use but the people who live there? So number one, I think that's the most important filter. Number two is you cannot have extractivism in biodiverse areas where there are endangered species, where you could where the activity threatens to contaminate water with heavy metals or any toxic substances like that. So that's, you can write off these areas. Before we get to this post-extractivism, we better figure out what these areas are. Archaeological areas, indigenous lands, sacred sites, all these areas need to be excluded from extractivism. I would go as far as saying that no native vegetation should be impacted by extractivism. And we need to get there quick to declare these areas, these no-go zones as soon as possible. It is tough. I mean, we have the rights of nature here. In fact, we are involved in the rights of nature case, the communities that I work with. The Codelco has this mining concession. They found copper. They have not been able to open the mine because of all the opposition and the lawsuits and all the noise that we've been able to make. But the copper's there. The copper's there, and it's going to go to, ironically, to help the world get over its climate crisis. In fact, it's going to make it worse. If we're providing these so-called clean metals from areas like these, we're actually going to make the climate crisis much worse. You realize that all these forests are capturing CO2 and stabilizing the climate here, right? So an open pit mine in an area like this would devastate between 4,000 and 10,000 hectares that are right now sucking carbon dioxide off from the atmosphere. It's primary cloud forests where they found the copper. So their plan is to provide electric vehicles and windmills and so forth with these supposed quote unquote green metals, clean metals. At the same time, they will destroy these carbon sinks, biodiversity jewels, and so on. This is where we need to become more and more aware of what this green transition is going to do and find ways to activate, get active, and see what we can do to speed up this transition to a post-extractivist world where well-being weighs a lot more than just economic development. I think I spoke my piece. I don't know, when do you want to ask questions later or?
Thank you, Carlos. We will have joint questions later, but thank you so much. I wonder though, you mentioned something really interesting and quite important, which I'd love for you to speak for a couple of more minutes on perhaps. You said that you kicked out the Japanese mining efforts. How did you do that?
Do you have a couple of hours?
Well, I guess it's not now, but we're interested because everyone loves to hear success stories, given how hard it is often to stop these.
We kicked out the Japanese in 1997, and the Canadians left a little bit of 10 years later. The Japanese, it was Mitsubishi, the world's largest, most powerful corporation at that time. They have a subsidiary, and they realized they were screwing up. And the communities, we helped the communities organize. We got a hold of the environmental impact study. We made it public. And it was unfiltered environmental impact study. So it was just amazing impacts. It would dry up our climate, contaminate rivers with heavy metals, and displace 4 communities. We made that, we socialized that all over the place. We made videos to explain to people what the real impacts were, and nobody wanted mining. And so they burned down the mining camp, and for Mitsubishi, that was enough, and they left. The Canadians, it was harder because they were much more aggressive, and it took just more work, and we sued the Toronto Stock Exchange, which was ground setting. It was the first time that stock exchange has ever been sued for human rights violation. And the company was kicked out of the Toronto Stock Exchange, which meant they ran out of money. But again, it was just a lot of organizing, a lot of talks, a lot of information, and they left. They did a lot of damage. Yep. And then Codelco came, the world's largest copper producer, and they are fully backed by the Ecuadorian government. The Ecuadorian government created a mining company. The only way they could access the mining concession was with the help of 400 police and military. They violently went into the mining concession and they set up camp in a forest that we bought for the communities that they were using for tourism. This beautiful primary forest. That's where they set up camp, and that's where they explored, and they did just terrible damage, contamination, logging, some logging of primary forest and so forth. We were unable to stop them because of the intimidation factor, police and military. And they've been there since 2014, 8 years, but they have not been able to open the mine. But they have been able to poison a lot of mines and co-opt a lot of people and local governments. That's who we're suing. The government, we're suing the government in Ecuador for violation of the rights of nature and for the violation of the community's rights to be consulted previously to activities like mining. The hearing is on the 21st of September, in less than 2 weeks. And we'll see what the court decides, but whether they decide in favor or against, we're continuing.
Thank you. That is impressive and amazing. But we'll let you go now, and we'll invite Marta to speak, but then we'll have discussion with everybody. Thank you so much, Carlos. And thank you for sharing that beautiful photo of your homeland. It is absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Marta, over to you now to share with us whatever. That sounds weird. Share with us whatever you wish. It's lunchtime and I'm hungry, I think, but please, over to you, my dear.
Thank you. I had my caring husband bringing me a sandwich, so
you're lucky.
I'm lucky. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not hungry. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if it works. Okay.
Good luck. Don't worry. We haven't had much technical luck today. The gremlins are with us, but you have a go.
Okay.
We're just so happy to be with you all, listening to this information, these stories. Don't stress about the tech. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great listening to Carlos. You're gonna hear many things that are gonna resonate. Carlos, he has the grounded vision. It's very good to hear him. I at first, well, whilst Natalie struggles with that, I want to tell you that I'm an activist scholar. I worked as a researcher, but I also like to work with local groups because I research mining conflicts and resistance to mining, and I like to work with communities and helping them in the struggles. So I'm part of the Yes to Life, Not to Mining network that Natalie is also part of. That's how I get to know all this wonderful work. I want to acknowledge, I'm speaking, this is a tradition you have here in Australia, which is amazing. I want to acknowledge and speak in the land of the Yugambeh people. I unfortunately don't know any Yugambeh people, so that would have been great because I would love to know more about how they live here. They used to live here, which probably is very different to how it is now, because at the moment I need a car to go anywhere. So I want to acknowledge those, traditional lifestyles that were happening here in this land before I arrived. I want to pass the next slide, Nat, please. I want to start by pointing to mining and extractivism are at the very start of capitalism. It started with sugar commodities, but mining was immediately after. The photo to the left is an image of what the miner in Potosi could look like. Well, it's an image, no? Like an imagination of what it could have been. Potosi is it's a mine in Bolivia where silver was extracted by the Spanish for export. And this was the start of the global patterns of uneven development and uneven wealth distribution that we see today. The plunder of the former colonies allowed industrialized countries, particularly in Europe and North America, to import what is called cheap metals and materials. And then they were transformed into high value added products, achieving higher levels of wealth understood in terms of money, not like Carlos was pointing, not wealth, inner wealth. And at the same time, they were avoiding grave environmental and social costs that this intensive extraction was causing. And I said former colonies, but in reality, this hasn't stopped. The image to the right, it points to Potosi nowadays, where mine extraction carries on for export of silver also. So this carries on, colonialism carries on also, as Dean was pointing out. Can you put the next slide, please, Nat? And I want to point to a double pressure for extraction. I think Liz was pointing to this too. There's a pressure for consumption or a drive for consumption in the global north, because our society, and in this I include European, North American, Australian societies, but social elites all over the world, have got used to very, very high levels of energy and material consumption. The way we eat, the way we move, the way we live, drives extraction of energy and materials all over the world. And this creates pressure to extract in the global south. This pressure is felt by companies and it's felt by countries in the global south, but pressure is put by companies and by the state, because many countries, and this includes Ecuador, that Carlos is from, but many countries, by Australia, for example, are now dependent on this form of extractivism. For example, Evo Morales in Bolivia has had a very progressive ideas for Bolivia, but it's completely locked into extractivism. They haven't been able to move away from extractivism, creating enormous conflicts with all the indigenous groups that were actually depending on the land, like Carlos was explaining. And Australia is the same. Australia, we see such a drive for extraction that has actually captured the state. We're opening and expanding new mining, overriding cultural, social, and environmental objectives. So there's this double pressure, which creates also a double objective. Nat, if you press the next one. So this double objective, we now see, we have on one hand, we want to reduce demand, to reduce consumption, and this has to come from the global north mostly. And the movement I advocate for is degrowth. I heard you have talked about this a couple of days ago, but I'm going to touch on this too in a moment. And then on the other hand, we need to have a reduction in production, in the actual expansion of extractivism. This is already being resisted by environmental justice movements, indigenous movements all over the world, demanding a right to say no. Carlos was talking about this. And in many occasions, these movements are supported by propositive worldviews that existed before all this extractivism occurred, like Buen Vivir in the Andes. We have resource sovereignty in Bolivia, Eco-Sahara in India, Ubuntu in Africa. There's many worldviews all over the world that support this post-extractivist world. So what am I hinting here is that we have these two movements that in reality are, more complex than this, but that they need to unite against capitalist greed and the thirst for extraction and growth. But now I'm going to talk about degrowth, which in a way aims at the first one and the reduction in demand. Nat, if you wanna. So I hope I'm not repeating too much, but you heard the other day. So what is degrowth? Degrowth is a call for a radical change in the political and economic organization of our society, which aims at reducing drastically our material and energy consumption. The assumption is this reduction should be democratic and fair. So this will entail a radical change of mentality of the collective imagination of how we live and how we relate to each other and what we do. And it's to abandon economic growth and GDP growth as the objective of society. Look at other indicators, well-being indicators, environmental indicators, social indicators, cultural indicators, but completely ignore the GDP as an indicator of how society is doing and thriving. And the degrowth offers a slogan that in a way mobilizes and unites different movements and peoples. Next slide. I'm gonna go through different dimensions of degrowth here quickly. The first one is ecology, which basically acknowledges that our lives are intimately connected with and dependent on our environment, and we should learn and relearn from local and indigenous groups that are more connected to land. And this links to the decolonial dimension, which is a recognition of the ongoing Western domination of development, of the development model. No, Carlos pointed that we need to ignore development model because it was in fact fabricated after Second World War, that supposedly all these countries should copy, this model, which is completely destroying the world. It's absurd. So we need to acknowledge that this development model is broken, doesn't work, and we need to acknowledge the domination that Western science and the Western way of thinking has had until now. And we need to give space to more knowledges and more ideas on how we take decisions, on how we do science, on how we eat, and listen more to these groups that are more connected to land. This links a bit with this dimension of anti-utilitarianism, which criticizes the uniformity of cultures, the idea that we're all the same. And it's a criticism of the orthodox economics, the homo economicus. So this is how still universities teach economics nowadays. It tells them that we're guided, all people are the same, we're all guided by personal interest and we seek more and more benefits. Whilst the growth and other people obviously think that people are actually have a vision, a wider vision. They have gifts, we give big gifts, we believe in reciprocity and coexistence, and where we think that social relations are more important. No, and here's a clear link with the theory and the promotion of the commons and the communal management. Another dimension is happiness and well-being that Carlos also spoke about, and it's crucial in driving change. I like to talk about the Easterlin paradox. I don't know if you heard about this, but it's a very well-established theory that has studied what happened when GDP was growing, especially in countries in Europe and in the US. So GDP was growing, material consumption was growing, and about in the 70s, GDP carried on growing, but happiness stopped growing. And so material consumption carried on, but it was not making people happier. And this is because growth inflates expectations and eventually creates frustration. And it's actually not very well known that actually well-being and happiness is a bit what Carlos was saying, no? It's more rooted in social relationships and caring and non-materialistic goals. So another dimension is democracy. So we want a more democratic society where we get to say a bit more, not just every 4 years with one vote, how everything is run. And there's a lot more to say about democracy, but I'm not going to go in there. And then ecofeminism is like a sister broader movement to degrowth that is it's about putting life at the center. Capitalism, since its inception, has appropriated the work and bodies of women, of vulnerable people, and they've put it to work for its benefit, invisibilizing all this work. So the objective is to make all this work visible, to revalue it, and to put it at the center of our lives, reproductive life, reproduction life, work, water, land, has to be the center of our economic system, not something that we hide and we don't even pay or recognize. And final, but perhaps the most important, is that in all these radical change, nobody can be left behind. So decreasing the growth only makes sense if all these sources are taken into account together, because if taken independently can lead to a reductionist project that is totally against the growth. For example, if you're only concerned about lack of resources or reduction of the ecosystems, but not about justice or equity, you can have top-down discourses with anti-population or anti-immigration proposals. Or if you have justice without democracy, you can have authoritarian solutions. Or you can have justice and democracy, but if you don't worry about the meaning of life, this can lead to technology-centric solutions. So we need to take all of these dimensions into account to achieve degrowth as well. So what does it mean in practice? Nat, if you want to go to the next slide. So here's some indications. For example, we could aim at reducing the economic activity of ecologically destructive sectors that don't offer any social benefit. So for example, we should stop subsidizing and investing in polluting activities like fossil fuel extraction, or stop industries like single-use plastics or even beef production, big one here, or stop marketing publicity that drive consumption. An accompanying measure could be, for example, that has been explored in Europe, a cap on material resource consumption or use. Another possibility, Nat, if you want to move, another way could be, so when dirty and socially unnecessary industries close down, like if you implement the other ones, you will see how economic activity will contract and unemployment can grow. So in order to prevent unemployment from growing, we can share work. So we can shorten the working week and redistribute labor into cleaner and socially useful sectors, or have these proposals of a job guarantee. There's policies that propose basic income, care income, or some argue that it would be better to provide essential services such as healthcare, education, or affordable housing. And then finally, if you move to the next one, how do we pay for all this? So there's been several studies and models that with very radical green tax reform, taxing carbon, wealth, land value, resource extraction, and corporate profits, you could pay for all these changes. So next slide. The problem that we see here, as Carlo was pointed, is that challenging extractivism might need more than reform on policy design, and needs more than resistance to extraction at the, like what Carlos is doing in INTAC. What we need is the pursuit of localized post-extractive alternatives, but at the same time, abandon capitalism and its entrenched patterns of colonial, racial, and patriarchal domination and oppression, which is big words, no? Because capitalism has been going on for centuries now. So how do we even start thinking about this? So I don't know, I don't have all the answers, but if you go to the next slide, but there's already a lot of movements across the world that are challenging and the domination of capitalism over our bodies, our work, and our lives. The thing is, all these movements don't even talk to each other. So I have here 4 photos, 4 images of 4 different movements. And I want you to think, what do they have in common? At the top left, we have the retrenched workers of SEAT, which is a car manufacturer in Spain. And this is actually in Barcelona, where I come from. This happened 2 years ago, and they closed the whole factory. And there was a huge movement on what they were going to do with them. I can tell you more about what happened, but then underneath, I have the indigenous organizations and landless workers movement in Brazil that have been fighting against pig, cattle, and logging companies in Brazil, in Brazilian rainforest. At the top right, we have communities resisting lithium mining in the Atacama fragile ecosystem in northern Chile. Lithium is a key mineral in the so-called green transition because it's a key element for batteries, and it's a huge passion for extract even here in Australia now. And at the bottom right, we have workers near the Tomago smelter in Newcastle here in Australia. There was going to be some retrenchment as they were also staging a protest. So all these have in common. Well, all these are exploited and dispossessed by the capitalist system. The capitalist system don't care about workers. They don't care about the environment. The objective of all these companies is to make profits for their shareholders. The objective, written in the DNA of all these companies, to make money at all costs. So all these movements have the same objective. They all want to be able to control how they work, how they eat, how they produce. Because the moment is that production has to be for need. What do we actually need? Not for profits. And this is where everything is, is broken. And so we need to talk about food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, water sovereignty, resource sovereignty. So we need to be able to have more control about what we produce. So, and next slide's Nat. But this is not only a workers or an anti-extractivist struggle. The fighting for capitalism is wider than this even. This movement needs to articulate with struggles against racial and heteropatriarchal domination. So they need to create intersectional solidarities and alliances with movements against racial domination, feminist struggles, First Nation and indigenous struggles, class struggles. There are many struggles across the world that actually are struggling against the same thing, capitalism dominating their lives. So the path for post-extractivism, and crucially also for climate change, needs to be accompanied by a shared vision for a post-capitalist transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. That was excellent. And please don't worry, your notes on degrowth really complement the discussions that were held, which had a stronger focus on Australia earlier this week. So thank you. So what I might do is spotlight our guest speakers again. And we've got a couple of questions in the chat. I'm just trying to find all my buttons. Some of them aren't doing what they should. How peculiar. I cannot spotlight Carlos. Oh, and here I was thinking I had earned my stripes as the queen of Zoom. Oh, there we go. Thank you, whoever did that. I don't know if I did it or... Anyway.
It was Nat.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah, I was looking and looking. It wasn't showing up. So thank you so much for those presentations. Lovely, lovely people. And I guess I just want to personally thank you for your hard work. I know this is a very distressing area to work in. I was part of the Yes to Life Noda mining network for a couple of years, and that's how I got to know Nat and many other incredible people. And I'm in deep admiration of the work that people do, particularly when things are coming right towards their front yard and places that they love. So thank you very much for your hard work, and we all wish you the very best. So in terms of questions, we've got about 3 lined up so far, but I'm sure a few more will come in. I think this was a reference to the idea of valuing environmental services. So the question is, even if the economic value of environmental services were calculated, they would far outweigh the short-term gains of any one industry's extraction. Are there scientists or activists working on quantifying the services? Now, just if this question is about quantifying ecosystem services, that's a body of work that is been happening for many years with Bob Costanza and others in a certain area of ecological economics. But Marta, Carlos, Liz, did you want to speak about that? Comment on that?
Well, actually, yeah, it's interesting that a while ago we hired a economist to put a value on ecosystem services in INTAC. Unfortunately, I don't like the idea of putting value on nature, economic value, because there's a lot more to nature than how much money it can produce for society. But it's the only thing these idiots in these high places understand. And we proved that, especially in long run, the ecosystem services here in INTA produce a lot more than mining ever would. And it's in perpetuity, right? Where mining only lasts maybe 20, 30 years, if you're lucky. Ecosystem services are producing all these services in perpetuity. And it was something to the tune of $458 million per year minimum. So yeah.
Marta, did you want to add to that?
No, I think, yeah, there's a whole debate in the field of ecological economics about this, to value or not to value. I was actually looking for a paper. I'll try to send it now. The title is this, to value or not to value. The thing is, at the end of the day, when you enter in that frame, you're already kind of entering the frame like environmental impact assessment. You're already saying, okay, we're valuing because we want to do something. You're not stopping to ask the people on the land if they want it or don't want it, or, you know, you're already entering the mind of, we want to value it because we want to enter in that dynamic that Carlos was pointing. So, yeah, is that really the question? Or we should really be asking the local people what they want, and then we move from there. How do they want to do it? And yeah, and that, rather than, yeah, and especially because once you enter in that dynamic, probably it also depends on, then you start asking how they're valuing it. Are they actually really counting life? Because then, you know, this was the case in Vedanta in India. The Orisha people were protecting a land, sacred mountain, that there was bauxite mine, they wanted to open it. And there was this whole argument, how do you put value to a god? For them, the god was on the top of the mountain, exactly where the bauxite was. And it was a sacred place, there only a few people went there. So how you put value to that? I mean, it's just like, you know, at the end, it's just better not to go there, at least from our point of view, even if you, yeah. But yes, what Carlos is saying, sometimes if you have to go there, then you enter into a social multi-criteria evaluation. So who then you have to, as the community, to enter in the process to actually evaluate different ways. But yeah.
Yeah, if you can avoid that framing, do it. And if you can't avoid it, given a humongous financial price to nature, because if it's the only thing, as Carlos politely said, these idiots get, then make sure they know how incredibly valuable it is.
Yeah, and not only economics, but also environmental. So it's not only economics that you have to focus on.
Of course, yeah. Thank you. Liz, did you have anything you wanted to say about the ecosystem services side of things? It happened.
No, I'm good, thanks. Yep.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. And thank you for those answers. We have a question from Walter. The global network of free trade agreements is designed to promote extractivism. The World Trade Organization, as the compliance department, harms economies greatly. Where might we start to deal with this?
Yeah, I think, I don't know where to begin because it is a very complex issue. Yeah, I think you have to understand that these companies are so powerful that they impose laws on the governments. And the World Bank, institutions like the World Bank and the Chinese import-export banks all over the world, not just Chinese, they do the same thing, is they basically want to guarantee that their companies are going to make money. This is really what it's all about. So these trade agreements are oriented towards that, to make sure that the companies from the global north make money, and then there's very little risk for them. Right now, Codelco, the Canadians sued Ecuador based on these BITs, bilateral investment treaties, to protect investments. And they're toxic because you can hardly win against those. They won even though they used paramilitaries, they violated Ecuadorian laws, so on and so forth. It's just one example. And now Codelco is taking Ecuador to court over the same mining project. So they use this tool to pressure government into ceding rights and violating their own constitution. It's a toxic tool, but these companies are so powerful, and the governments do the bidding of these very large, powerful companies.
Mm. Thank you, Carlos. Marta or Liz, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can add. I mean, something just from a research project that I've been involved in writing recently on the green extractivism. A complication here is that there are masses of new free trade agreements being made around mining, around the critical minerals, and these are, it's just being done at such a high level of, it's the state corporate capture thing. And so how do we start to resist when not only are they doing it, but they're greenwashing that they're doing it to save the planet, that we've got to create these massive, like US and Australia is very instrumental in a lot of these new agreements, because we are going to be providing so many of these critical minerals, but also we're sending our companies over. Ecuador is a good example with copper, lithium in Argentina. There's lots, and US as well. So there's a lot of sort of shuffling going on, and at the geopolitical level, it's and it's also getting into national security issues. Oh no, we need to break free from China, so we need to make this new free trade agreement with this other country. So yeah, I think we've just got to really learn about the geopolitics of it, I think, and talk at that macro level if we're wanting to work out where to go.
As a lawyer type or a recovering lawyer, that's actually what I was going to mention, just for my 2 cents worth, is a reminder to everyone. Just remember that allegedly international law is mostly about the nation states. So these so-called countries, and they're only several hundred years old, and they are the entities that make country to country agreements. And then you've got this whole body of private international law where corporations make agreements between themselves and with countries. So when you're thinking about how do we stop this, some of it's about advocating to your own country that they shouldn't be engaging in these kinds of free trade agreements. But we know how hard that is. It's really hard. So a lot of folks talk to Ayla about these things too, like how can an individual do this work? Well, a lot of the power in that situation is at the moment allegedly with our nation states, our governments. But the interesting thing is what we see with the global south is that these corporations override the power of the nation states like Ecuador. When Coca-Cola sued the Northern Territory government, so think about that, a corporation sued the Northern Territory government several years ago because the Northern Territory government introduced a container deposit fee to try to get people to recycle their Coca-Cola bottles. And under the private trade agreements and everything else, they looked like they were going to win. The only way they did win is that Australia, the COAG, the Council of Australian Governments, fiddled with certain aspects under the Constitution and under certain agreements and declared this act to be not appropriate. And they actually passed legislation to change the court decision that found Coca-Cola could, in fact, meddle with the government's policies to try to recycle. So the powers are huge. And as Liz said, the macro scale is immense. And all of these systems have been built for many hundreds of years, but particularly since the end of the Second World War, where we saw the World Trade Organizations, the IMO, all of these systems are massive. And the way to actually engage in tackling them is to work with folks like Liz and Marta and Carlos and Nat, because they're at the heartland of trying to challenge these power structures. Marta, do you have something to add?
Yeah, in Europe, I have more the vision in Europe because that's where I've been living most of my life. There's two organizations that work a lot on this. They're called Counterbalance. I write the names now, and Bankwatch. They're the biggest organizations that have been behind huge fights in the European for example, against the TTIP, which is a free trade agreement with the US and Canada, and they managed to stop it, but then it came back. And the thing is, basically what I'm aiming at is that if you concerned about this, then you can work on this. I mean, there's organizations that work on this and that can advise you. And I'm sure there's organizations here in Australia that can work on this, and it's an amazing work they do, and very necessary work.
Thank you, Marta. And it's one of the reasons I think these like Yes to Life, No to Mining, and the other networks globally that are bringing all of the activists and folks together, challenging what's going on at this global scale, is so important, because it's just so hard to fight these mining companies one by one. I think Nat's just popped some comments in there. I'll see if I can read them out. Excuse me. And so Nat Lowry, who's part of Yes to Life, No to Mining, and a wonderful activist in the post-extractivist space, thinking about the lack of transparency in Australia, WikiLeaks revealed the Department of Foreign Affairs was arguing that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement should allow companies to sue developing country governments for lost profits. So think that through. WikiLeaks revealed that our Department of Foreign Affairs was saying that through this hideous Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, private companies, where the benefits go to a small group of shareholders, should be able to sue the governments of other countries when those countries stop them from making their profits by booting them out or doing other things. So these power plays are horrible and very ancient. People in power like to stay in power and control and think they control. So much to do. Okay, I think we've only got one more question that's come through in the chats, but there's been a number of different comments too, and we've got about 4 minutes left, so we can move with that. Walter has asked, in Ecuador, what economic changes have appeared after chasing away those two mining companies, the ones that you mentioned, Carlos? Dismantling one sort of economy in favor of another seems very difficult. And then he wrote, I'm looking for success stories. So I think, so just coming back to what you were talking about, Carlos, in getting rid of the Japanese and Canadian companies that wanted to mine, what other good things can you share about that story?
I'm going to turn off my camera because the internet is pooping out, so I can answer it quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that our struggle is known for is not only to say no to mining, but to come up with alternatives. So tourism grew out of the resistance. There's community tourism, there's private tourism that in the last few years has just exploded. There's also a micro hydro electric projects that are built without dams and controlled completely by communities. There is we're looking for markets to sell some of the coffee that's grown here. That also grew out of the resistance. Shade-grown organic coffee, directly out of the resistance to find. So now this coffee, our coffee before, it was just going to the local dealers, these guys who, traders, that's all. They would buy cheap and sell expensive in the capital. Now the coffee from our region is going to Japan, Canada, the US, and Europe. So that gives you an idea of what's happening since the mine.
I think that's excellent. There's some terrific examples of localized economic development, localized economic initiatives rising up in the shadow of the defeating the bad, nasty big companies. Very simplistic. So, ladies and gentlefolk, we're at 1:28 and we've only got 2 minutes left. So I'd actually like to use that time to firstly thank our speakers. This has been a really excellent overview. And Marta, Liz, and Carlos, I'd certainly love to follow up with all of you to get further information about. Some folks have put in links about podcasts and interviews, materials and articles. So I might work with Nat to see if we can get some of those materials up onto the NINA website. We've got a little post-extractivist hub page on the website, and I personally would love to read some more of those materials. So on behalf of everyone in our group today here listening and sharing, I'd like to do a huge thank you, and perhaps everyone could thank people in their usual Zoom fashion, either with a Daggy air clap, or you can press the reaction button. You might clap, or you might throw a party. I like the party one, it's very nice. But thank you so much for your time and your efforts and your work, and for joining us from overseas, Carlos. We're very grateful to have you zoomed into our room. And before you all go, I would not be doing my job properly if I didn't give a quick plug for all of the good things that are coming up in the next few weeks. Ayla's Earth Laws Month, and I'll put the main link. Actually, Christina, if you wouldn't mind, just put the web link in for the program. Inside our program, we've got events that feature Indigenous speakers. For example, next week we're linked to Regen Songlines. Tuesday night, there'll be a roundtable discussion with people like Tyson Yonka-Porter and Mary Graham and several others talking about sustainability and regenerative everything and caring for country, and really critiquing some of the Western ideas about what they think regenerative is versus what an ancient culture that's land-based thinks it is. Also on the Wednesday afternoon, there's going to be some updates from the regen movements around Australia. There's some city groups and a few other regional groups. And we've also got, like I said, on the 23rd, Liz and Nat will be coming back to talk about green extractivism. And we've got tons of other good things. So please do check out the program. All the events are free, except when they're co-hosted by other folks like Indigenous groups who have a small ticket price. And if you've got any questions for any of our wonderful speakers, and if you can't find them, please send us an email at Ayla, AELA, @earthlaws.org.au, or Nina, NENA, @neweconomy.org.au. Shoot us through a note and we'll connect you up, or please get in touch directly with our speakers. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been really enlightening and depressing and important and uplifting all at once. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.